There comes a point in an overthinker's life when the mind turns inward, not to explore, but to question, not to imagine, but to analyze. This is where the conflict begins between the person they are and the countless versions of themselves they fear, desire, or try to avoid. It is an invisible tension, almost impossible for others to notice. But inside, it feels like standing between mirrors that reflect every angle at once. Every thought becomes a possibility. Every decision becomes a crossroads. Every emotion becomes a signal to decode. The overthinker lives between who they want to be and who they fear others might see. At the heart of this conflict is something tender. They want to understand themselves. Truly, deeply, accurately. But the more they try to understand, the more fragmented the picture becomes. They question their motives. They question their reactions. They question whether their feelings are genuine or simply shaped by fear, habit, or expectation. A simple conversation can turn into a mental replay. A minor mistake can become evidence of a deeper flaw. A quiet moment can become a space where intrusive doubts circle like soft shadows. What if I said the wrong thing? What if they misunderstood my silence? What if my feelings aren't valid? What if I'm becoming the version of myself I don't want to be? This internal interrogation is not self-hatred. It is self-surveillance, an attempt to ensure they remain aligned with the version of themselves they believe they should be. And yet, the more they monitor, the less authentic they feel. This conflict creates an emotional split. One part wants clarity, another part wants peace. But clarity demands analysis, and peace demands surrender. Letting go feels reckless. Holding on feels exhausting. Inside this tension, a quiet resistance forms, an internal pushback against their own thoughts. A part of them whispers, "Stop thinking." But another part whispers, "If you stop, you might overlook something important." They don't want to miss the details. They don't want to repeat old patterns. They don't want to become someone who hurts others or betrays themselves. So they remain suspended between intention and doubt. Their emotional world becomes layered. On the surface, they appear composed. Beneath that, they are evaluating. And underneath everything, there is a deeper layer, a feeling they rarely speak about. Fear. Not loud, dramatic fear. A quiet one. A fear of becoming the wrong self. A fear of disappointing their future. A fear of looking back and realizing they live the wrong story. This fear does not scream. It whispers. It nudges. It keeps them scanning, questioning, anticipating. The conflict becomes even more complex when they encounter connection. When someone gets close, the overthinker becomes hyper-aware of their own behavior. They analyze how they laughed, how they replied, how long they paused before speaking. They start asking, "Is this really me? Or is this the version of me I think they expect?" Authenticity becomes difficult when their mind rehearses every possible self they could present. Even their emotions become suspect. A feeling rises, and they wonder if it is genuine or if it comes from fear, conditioning, or imagined possibility. This is the quiet tragedy of the overthinker. They long for a self that feels whole and certain, but their ability to imagine alternate selves keeps that certainty just out of reach. Still, this conflict is not hopeless. It is simply the mind trying to reconcile what is real with what is possible. A mind trying to understand itself in a world that offers too many mirrors and too little stillness. And beneath the resistance, something gentle begins to emerge. A curiosity about what lies beyond the thought loops. A faint recognition that the self is not something to perfect, but something to meet with understanding. The conflict does not end here, but this is where the awareness begins. There is a quiet moment, different for each person, when the loop slows down just long enough for something new to slip through. Not an answer, not a solution, a realization. It often arrives during the simplest of situations. A pause before responding, a long walk without headphones, a night when the mind is too tired to run in circles, or a conversation that unexpectedly feels safe. Whatever the moment looks like on the outside, the shift happens inside. Subtle, soft, almost unnoticed. It begins with a feeling rather than a thought. a gentle sense that the mind is tired of predicting every possible version of the future, tired of rehearsing every possible version of the self, tired of preparing for outcomes that exist only in imagination. For the first time in a long time, they sense something underneath the noise, a presence that feels more like themselves than any version they have ever analyzed. This is the turning point. The moment the mind pauses long enough to hear the truth beneath the fear, they realize the possibilities they have been imagining are not all equal. Some are rooted in memory, some in emotion, some in old fears that no longer match their present life, and some are simply echoes of who they were when they had no choice but to anticipate everything. The mind, for the first time, sees the pattern. All those imagined selves were not predictions. They were protections, versions created to avoid pain, to avoid regret, to avoid becoming someone they once feared they might turn into. And suddenly the loop feels different, not weaker, just clearer. They begin to see that overthinking was not a flaw. It was a survival strategy, a way to maintain control in moments where they once felt powerless, a way to stay ahead of emotional consequences they didn't yet have the strength to face. But as life changes, some strategies outlive their purpose. In this turning point, they feel a soft understanding. The mind is still trying to protect them from a past they no longer live in. This recognition is not loud or dramatic. It is gentle, a quiet loosening of something inside. They start to question the questions themselves. Do I truly need to imagine every outcome? Am I trying to foresee the future? Or am I avoiding being present with myself? Is this decision actually risky? Or am I afraid of old emotions resurfacing? These questions do not stop the overthinking, but they shift the direction. The mind starts to look inward, not to analyze, but to understand. Then comes another realization. Each imagined version of themselves holds a story, a fear, a desire, a memory, a longing. None of these versions are enemies. They are fragments of identity waiting to be acknowledged. The version who fears disappointing others. The version who wants to be understood. The version who wants to be bold, but fears losing stability. The version who still carries childhood echoes of be careful and don't make mistakes. When they finally recognize that each imagined self has a reason for existing, something begins to soften. The internal conflict slows. The resistance loosens. The pressure to choose the right self becomes lighter. And in that softening, the mind discovers there's a quiet moment, different for each person, when the loop slows down just long enough for something new to slip through. Not an answer, not a solution, a realization. It often arrives during the simplest of situations. A pause before responding, a long walk without headphones, a night when the mind is too tired to run in circles, or a conversation that unexpectedly feels safe. Whatever the moment looks like on the outside, the shift happens inside. Subtle, soft, almost unnoticed. It begins with a feeling rather than a thought, a gentle sense that the mind is tired of predicting every possible version of the future, tired of rehearsing every possible version of the self, tired of preparing for outcomes that exist only in imagination. For the first time in a Some people don't grow up battling the world. They grow up battling their own thoughts. Not because they want to, but because no one ever taught them what to do with the things they felt. So their childhood becomes a quiet negotiation. Don't say too much. Don't feel too deeply. Don't make things harder for anyone. Don't speak about what hurts. And slowly, the mind learns to fold in on itself. What should be expressed becomes hidden. What should be released becomes stored. And what should have been a simple feeling turns into a lifetime of overthinking. They grow older, but the internal training stays the same. They analyze their emotions instead of experiencing them. They question every move before making it. They replay every moment long after it's gone. They assume silence is safety and expression is danger. Because somewhere deep inside, the mind still believes, if I say what I truly feel, something bad will happen. This is the root of self-conflict. Not weakness, not insecurity, but a survival strategy never updated. A child learned to hide. An adult continues to disappear. And the strange thing is this: they don't fear the world nearly as much as they fear their own reactions to it. The fear of being too much, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being emotionally exposed. Over time, repression doesn't kill emotions, it amplifies them in silence. And overthinking doesn't protect you, it only exhausts you with possibilities that never happened. People like this don't need to become stronger, they need to become gentler with themselves. Not everything you feel needs to be solved. Not every thought deserves an investigation. Not every emotion is a threat. Sometimes, healing begins the moment you stop arguing with yourself and allow the mind to rest in truth instead of fear. Because the mind that learned to fight itself is the same mind that can learn to protect itself with patience, honesty, and permission to finally feel. There's a quiet dignity in a mind that thinks too much, a beauty in a heart that carries too much, a tenderness in a person who feels every possibility before it happens. Overthinking is not a flaw, it is a reflection of care, of awareness, of a mind that refuses to settle for less than truth, even if truth is uncertain, even if truth is unfinished. To overthinkers, life is never simple. Even small decisions are landscapes of reflection, emotional contours that stretch further than anyone else can see. And yet, within that constant imagining lies an extraordinary gift, an empathy for the self and others, a sensitivity that allows for deep observation, and an ability to see the invisible threads that connect moments, people, and feelings. But the gift is double-edged. Because what the mind creates in care, it can also trap. Because every imagined path can weigh like stone, and every alternate self can become a mirror that shows the self in pieces. And so, the tenderest work begins, not in thinking less, but in noticing more. Not in erasing fears, but in observing them with patience. Not in silencing thoughts, but in understanding their origin, their purpose, and their impermanence. There's power in allowing the mind to rest, even briefly, in watching thoughts as clouds rather than chains, in acknowledging that perfection is not required for existence, that uncertainty is not failure, that being human is enough. The overthinker learns that the self is not a single version to choose, but a tapestry of all that has been imagined, felt, and lived. Each version, a thread woven with care. Each possibility, a color in the pattern of a life that is alive, not perfect. And in these moments of stillness, they begin to meet themselves fully. The anxious child who once learned to anticipate danger. The cautious adult who continues to calculate. And the quiet observer who finally allows room for the breath, for presence, for acceptance. It is here that overthinking softens into reflection. Here, the weight of every imagined version eases. Here, the mind and heart can coexist without judgment. Here, the self can be tender with its own complexity and find beauty in the imperfections that make it human. The world may never fully see the inner landscapes of these people. They may still appear hesitant, cautious, or contemplative. But inside, a transformation has quietly taken place. The mind that once circled endlessly has discovered the stillness between thoughts. The heart that once carried burdens alone now feels held. And the self that once feared becoming lost can finally rest in being. Because being human is not about choosing the right version. It is about embracing the fullness of all that you are and allowing yourself to exist gently amidst the possibilities. The overthinker lives many lives within a single life, and the tenderness of being human is learning to honor each one, without needing to conquer them, without needing to perfect them, simply allowing them to be. And in this quiet acceptance, there is peace, not dramatic or final, but soft, steady, and alive, a reflection of a mind that has finally begun to meet itself